Je m'appelle Philippe Vincent Foisy, je suis président de la Tribune de la Presse. We have with us for this press conference former Grand Chief and Elder Mike Mitchell, Mohawk Territory of Akwesasne, Assembly of First Nation National Chief Perry Bellegarde, and I'm sorry for the names, Tyendinaga Mohawk Council Chief Donald Maracle, Mohawk Council of Kahnawake Grand Chief Joseph Norton, and Mohawk Council of Kanehsatake Grand Chief Serge Otis Simon. They're with us here. Ils vont prendre la parole. We'll answer questions afterwards. Please put your cell phone on vibration so we don't hear the noise of your cell phone. Gentlemen.
Sego. What's the name of you do? Tayagwega. Asquadon so the nothing go one night. Tagwa Harori. This one Horadon is where this Tashigionisur, Humado, to Yorin Dayagwe. Negadi Yaguaquisla, Nayama. Nay, you went on Yagwatste, and the guy Agwegun and what he was soon. My name is Kanehsatake. I'm the former Grand Chief of Akwesasne. I've served my community for over 30 years. The reason that I was asked to come and speak is my long history in politics. I'm also a faith keeper in the Mohawk Nation Longhouse, protector of our ceremonies, songs, spiritual life. So when you balance your culture and your language and your spiritual ways, it's very important, not just a politician, but a human being. What I want to convey in my introduction is about the community of Tyendinaga. I want to note it that Tyendinaga is the Mohawk name of Joseph Brant. The British asked Joseph Brant to ask the Haudenosaunee if they could be allies in constructing a new country called Canada. I put emphasis on that, allies, for they had to face confrontations with the French, with the Americans, and as it stands today as Canada, we're still allies with Canada. The other thing for Tyendinaga that has significant meaning is the birthplace of a peacemaker that brought us the great law of peace. Very spiritual man, born at a time when there was great violence, turmoil amongst the 5 nations, Mohawks, Cayugas, Onondagas, Seneca. For all those warring nations, he approached each and every one of them and convinced them to do away with warfare. It is significant because where he was born, he went across Lake Ontario to Haudenosaunee country. He was able to stop the warfare, the killing, and turn it into a great union by providing them with a constitution based on peace. I want to invoke that because this is the time for us to remember what that message of peace was about. It's always easy to go the other route. This is my introduction because I have my comrades sitting to my right who are going to speak to the whole area of relationship, peaceful relationship or not. It's our choice. We're at the crossroads, and we must invoke the message of the peacemaker if we're going to have lasting peace, security, wellness in our communities. And that goes both ways. For the people in Canada are just beginning to learn. And I'm well aware there's a lot of hatred in this country. It's directed at First Nations. We've got a lot of work to do. We can react, or we can sit down and consult with one another based on that message of peace left by the peacemaker. That's my opening introduction.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. And nista nenaskom un kel naskom tenwa kahkia no temtik no akomaganak. Nista no tainan samato kel naskom ten. Kahkia Haudenosaunee ukimawa kel naskom tenwa. Algonquins Kanehsatake and Kahnawake. A little bit in Cree, friends and relatives. I'm happy to be here, acknowledging you all and giving thanks to the Creator for this day, acknowledging the Haudenosaunee Chiefs here, and acknowledging as well the Algonquin territory and the peoples whose land we gather. And I'm here today as AFN National Chief to speak about the Wet'suwet'en and the hereditary chiefs and what's going across this land. And I've spoken to many, many people in the last 48 hours. And I've been in touch with many, many leaders, regional chiefs, hereditary chiefs, the elected Tyendinaga chiefs. I've talked to the federal government, provincial governments, and industry, and how we can find a way forward. And today, again, of course, we're calling for calm. We're calling for creativity and constructive dialogue. The Wet'suwet'en peoples have asked that they be given space for their own internal dialogue and ceremonies to be held. They've told me they want to create their own approach to formalize discussions with the federal and provincial governments, the Crown. And they need to be given that time. And I know both levels of government, federal and provincial, have reached out to the Wet'suwet'en peoples. And I want the Crown, the Crowns, and the governments to support the process of the Wet'suwet'en peoples that they've put forward in terms of coming together to formalize that relationship with the Crown. We say we want to de-escalate and we want dialogue. And I say our people are taking action because they want to see action. And when they see positive action by the key players, when they see a commitment to real dialogue to address this difficult situation, people will respond in a positive way. They'll respect the need to give everyone time and space for that dialogue to happen. And going forward, this will be a clear sign that, of course, we need a new approach. When governments ignore First Nations rights, title, jurisdiction, it creates conflict and court cases. But when governments respect First Nations rights and title, it's a path to peace, progress, and prosperity. And I know the UN Declaration is the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is a roadmap to reconciliation, no question. No one said reconciliation would be easy. This is hard work. And if we're going to move this country forward, it's long overdue. We need to see that nation-to-nation dialogue. We've called again, and the Wet'suwet'en peoples themselves, through their ceremony, their big house, through their traditions, their laws, will find a way. The requests they made were simple, 3 requests. The RCMP to be out of their traditional territories. In Canada, we've got the OPP in Ontario, you got the SQ in Quebec, the police forces. But we also have our own tribal police, alternatives that can be looked at. Wet'suwet'en need to give that direction, and if so, there's options available. They've also asked again that the industry players look at options, and they should be prepared to look at options. It's 2 requests. The 3rd request is the formalization of the process with the Crown. And as I understand it, there is a request for meetings and to formalize that process. And I ask, once that process is formalized, that people give time for that process to bear fruit. Positive discussions. I also want to say that in this day and age, when we start talking about reconciliation, and I'm really glad that the Haudenosaunee leadership is here, because we're all about peaceful coexistence and mutual respect. And now in February in 2020, and I've said this before, that as human beings, we can't give up on each other. We cannot give up on each other. We cannot give up on peaceful coexistence and mutual respect. We cannot give up on reconciliation. We cannot give up on our treaty relationship with the Crown. We can't give up on the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It is the pathway forward. So I wanted to say that. I wanted to say those words and acknowledge you all for being here. We have a special relationship with the Crown. We are allies of the Crown. And we have a nation-to-nation relationship. It's time to really get that started in processes to move beyond the Indian Act and to respect our laws and jurisdiction as well. Always with those principles of peace and coexistence to mutually benefit from sharing the land and resource wealth as well together. I'll say that much for now. Well, Chief.
Sego Sawaguego, Yunyats Adarotsario, Wagatahioni. The elected Chief Don Miracle of the Mohawks of Akwesasne. I bring greetings of peace and friendship to all who live and share this great land, that the homeland of our Indigenous nations. I want to emphasize that I love and respect all of my people, and I respect all the Wet'suwet'en territory leadership and the decisions they make, because that is their place to do so. I also love and respect my people when they feel something is wrong, to be able to stand up for what they believe in. That is a Canadian value. I want to emphasize the need for peace and dialogue, as well as parties to work together to resolve the situation that we're now in. I would never try to speak for another First Nation. I will say that the situation affecting the Wet'suwet'en people resonates in many other parts of this country, because it strikes at the issues that we all deal with: respect and implementation of our rights by the federal and provincial governments, our right to make decisions that affect our land and lives, and the right to have a say when it comes to resource development within our traditional territory and its impacts on our territory. And I want to emphasize this: all parties in both the federal and provincial governments need to support dialogue and do their part not to inflame the situation by using aggressive language and actions that will not be helpful. I echo the words of my colleagues here that this is a time to create a calm and to support dialogue. The government needs to show leadership and show First Nations across the country that it is committed to resolving long-standing disputes in good faith and good dialogue, and be open to look at all the options for discussion. I think it is now time that we need to hear what the leadership, the traditional leadership of the Wet'suwet'en Nation, have to say on a path forward, and do they have proposals to bring resolution to the internal affairs of their nation. And so I wish the Creator to shine the Deyohaswatera, the good light that comes from the Creator God, on the path that we should follow to bring about peace and harmony and happiness to all the people who share this land. It's going to go on Nisui Sewakwego. Nyawa.
Nyawa. Thank you very much. There's so much to say and there's so little time to do it in, but I will do my best to present, I guess, a view of the situation where we're at. I've been involved in a lot of different events. One of them that stands out in my mind, 1990, I was a Grand Chief way back then, as I am now in this particular circumstance. So I do have a history of involvement and seeing things and hearing things. And there are similarities to what happened way back 30 years ago as what's happening now. I'll call it the stubbornness and the refusal for the provinces and the federal government to recognize the situation, the relationship that supposedly was established. I mean, we didn't say those terms. We didn't say United Nations Declaration on Indigenous People. We didn't We did not stand up and we did not say reconciliation. We're not the ones who've apologized for things that have happened to our people over the course of time. It's somebody else that had to do that. And we've accepted that. I come from a place called Kahnawake, which is just across the river from Montreal. We have 100,000 people a day coming back and forth to our community. We've got bridges, railways, we've got an international seaway. You know, you name it, it's there. Somebody else, for somebody else's purposes, not for ours. Now, this is not a plea. I'm not here today to talk strictly about that, but we know what it is to be imposed on, you know. And our brothers and sisters in Wet'suwet'en territory out in BC are suffering the same circumstances. There may be some differences of opinion on the I guess the way things have happened over the course of time to allow for the circumstance to deteriorate to the degree it is right now. But here is an opportunity now for all the country to begin to realize the exposure that our people have and the way the governments have behaved over the course of time. This is not a new issue. This goes back in time. The implementation of the Indian Act on our people has divided our communities. Each one of us sitting up here that represents a community has seen that happen within our communities, divisions because of the Indian Act, because of traditional beliefs. So it's a time for us to come back together, as we have always talked about. It's a time for us to seek out the proper way of dealing with issues and matters when they arise. But on the other hand, we have if you will, a partner. The partner is Canada and the provinces that need to realize and understand that they are the cause of these things that happen. It's not by accident. It's by the way laws are put in place. It's by the way the Constitution is structured, the courts, all of that stuff that's out there is against us. We don't stand a chance. We spend hundreds of millions of dollars walking into those courts, sort of knowing that, you know, we're going to get our ass kicked, if I may be blunt about it. Yet at the same time, we say, well, we have to go in, we have to try, we have to make it known our disagreement and dissatisfaction with the system as it stands. The Wet'suwet'en people in BC is a perfect example of that, trying their best, the hereditary chiefs, to defend the land, to protect their people, and find themselves in court, find themselves then being bullied, being attacked physically, weapons pointed at people. Luckily, nobody was shot. People being arrested, put in jail. For what? Protection of land. Protection of our territory. Our people out here in the East see that, and they see themselves in that. They feel that pain and that anger. They sense it, and they know it. Because we've seen it happen to ourselves. So we're prepared to defend ourselves too. And the young people stand up and say, we're not going to put up with that. And you know something? There's awakening, not only in our young Indigenous people, there's a lot of young Canadians, white people who are now joining forces. That's why every day in Montreal, city of Montreal, you'll see mass protests on the streets, majority being your people who are doing that, because they know it's their future too. They understand, and the consciousness of the environment is becoming a major issue with them. So they look at what we're doing, and they understand that there has to be some sort of amalgamation between what we are doing and what they are, and what they want, what they need. They're looking for answers too. So it's not just our people. We're defending our land, but also we're defending the land for other people too. We're defending the environment for the future of Canadians, not just our own people. So that's a message that this government across the street, up the hill, has to understand, has to acknowledge. So they can have all their little meetings within their parliament, within their cabinet, and come up with counter plans about how they're going to enforce the law, not enforce the law. They don't know what to do. Why not listen to us?
Yeah.
We can help you. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I guess I'm up next.
Yeah.
There you go. No go. First, just give you a little bit of background. My name is Serge Uzi Simon. I'm the Grand Chief of the Mohawk Council, Kanehsatake. And over the years, as Chief, I've seen a lot of issues come to our table. Everything that you've been reporting over the years, missing and murdered, environment issues, land claim issues, and so on. As a matter of fact, I was part of one of the original 3 chiefs who went out west to try to form an alliance against the tar sand expansion. At the time, I was fighting Trans-Canada, and out west they were fighting Trans Mountain and other projects. So I've been the strongest advocate of First Nations' right to say yes, but I've also been just as adamant about the right to say no. So I don't take this lightly when I make this request. I'm not demanding anything, never did, about lifting the blockades as a show of good faith, because there's a bigger picture at play here. The UN Declaration on Indigenous Rights might be postponed or may very well be scuttled, and we could be taking 10 years back in our relations because of this issue. But like I mentioned, my time when we fought for the Treaty Alliance, we managed to bring together 150 chiefs across Canada who were not in favor of the expansion of the pipelines and bringing in bitumen oil through their territories. So there are many ways of showing support. There are many ways of protesting something. It puts an enormous amount of pressure on governments and industry. So do we look at the rail blockades as having served its purpose for now? I'm simply pleading with the protesters that, have you made your point yet? Has the government and the industry understood? I think they did. Now, removing the blockades doesn't mean that you surrender anything. It just means you tell the government, okay, we're going to show good faith, we're going to remove the blockades, but keep this in mind. If you do not continue on a dialogue of respect with the hereditary chiefs, then we'll be back. The next one might last longer. It might not be the rails. It might be something else, because it's the only thing that we have, the only weapon we have to have our rights recognized and affirmed. It's a damn shame we have to resort to that type of action in a country that wants to reconcile. Reconciliation is a hard road, but the road's already been taken. Canadian society has accepted that it has done wrong to First Nations people in many ways, and they're trying to reconcile that wrong. They're trying to make amends for that wrong. That's why I mentioned in the media the possibility of eroding public support, public opinion. Could go against everything we've worked for so far. And it's important that the ideals of peace be respected, and that we walk down that road and try to make amends for whatever relationship problems we might have. We have to work harder at it. As it stands now, I have a group of people, because of my message, have padlocked my band office doors, locked me out, saying they want me out. I'm not surprised. Over the history of mankind, you've seen people who've advocated peaceful ways being criminalized and being brushed aside. And so I'm not saying that this is the case here. I think it's just misunderstanding the message. Bringing down the road, the blockades doesn't mean that you surrender. Like I said a while ago, it doesn't mean we're going to just lay down and let them kick us around. No. But it would show compassion along with the strength. And that's what needs to be, I think, promoted and talked about a little bit more. Yes, you have the strength and the power to do what you're doing, but you also have the power of compassion that other people are suffering across the country because of this blockade. And not just non-Indigenous, the Indigenous people as well. Shortages in propane and probably food supplies are gonna start getting critical if this continues. So it will be a self-defeating purpose to continue on with the blockade. So I'm hoping that reason and peace are going to prevail, and that the message is going to continue on. So, for me, I thank you. I appreciate you listening to me.
Yeah.
No, go. Voilà.
Thank you very much. On va passer à la période de questions. One question, one follow-up. I already have names on the list, so if you want to add your name, just raise your hand. We'll start with Globe and Mail.
Good morning, National Chief.
Good morning.
Good morning, National Chief. This is a new thing with the microphone.
I can hear you.
Some people have likened the situation that's happening right now to Idle No More. I'm wondering, do you see any parallels?
I think this is, again, a coming together of people. Young people, old people, men, women, Indigenous people, non-Indigenous people. And it's a coming together to wake up, you know. And so Idle No More came together a few years back because of the omnibus bills. You know, you can remember that. I think it was 38 and 41, C-38 and 41, the omnibus bills, and how it was easier for industry just to start developing land and waters and territories without Indigenous people's consent. And so that said, people said, hey, as First Nations people, we can't accept that, you know. And so there was a rising up of that. And we've always said that as Indigenous peoples, we have a very, very important right, the fundamental right to self-government, self-determination. And I've always said this, we have our own lands, our own laws, our own languages, our own people, our own identifiable forms of government. And the right to self-determination means the right to say yes and or the right to say no. And we've always said that when our people get involved, we find the balance between the environment and the economy. Our people will use an environmental lens when you're doing an assessment of any major economic development initiative. And really that's the path forward. So what's happening now, the message will be simply the need for the full involvement and the inclusion of Indigenous peoples. The rights and title holders have to be involved every step of the way. And the message is quite simply this: to utilize this energy, whether it's Idle No More or just the movement that you see, to balance. You know, it's important to balance the environment, the economy. And this movement going forward, you see the need to, instead of just profit now, people are saying, you got to put the planet first because we're all in this together. You got to see the impacts on people and then profit at the end. And so this movement is similar, but I think it's more in the sense that it's utilizing this energy to bring about change because our people want action. And that's what they want to see, something substantive, something meaningful. And that's really what's needed. So similarities, it's peace. It's all about peaceful coexistence and respect, bringing about change, getting the rights and title holders involved with the crowns. That's what's important. So we have to utilize that energy.
And just as a follow-up, what do you think of the Prime Minister and the government's approach to handling this situation, and to what extent does the responsibility fall at the feet of the Prime Minister himself, or does it?
It's on everybody. It's not any one individual. You got representatives of the Crown, you have the ministers. Minister Mark Miller went out. You got to lift him up. I said that before. You know, the Crown has an obligation, in this case with the Haudenosaunee, the covenant chain. You know, Chief Don speaks of that. The Crown has a responsibility to keep that covenant chain, that silver chain, shiny and polished. You know, we're allies of the Crown. And so it's whether the Prime Minister comes himself or the ministers of the Crown, it's the Crown has an obligation. Then the Little Crown has an obligation. You know, the BC government has an obligation to get to the table. And then as well, even amongst the Wet'suwet'en people themselves have an obligation to sort this out, because you see the hereditary chiefs on one side, then you have the Wet'suwet'en people on the other side, and the chiefs duly elected through band referendums as well to support the Coastal GasLink. They've got to come to the table. So it doesn't rest with any one person. I'm just calling on all the parties to come together, get this dialogue started in a constructive way, and this can be mapped out going in the future. Just make sure the Aboriginal rights and title holders are there. That's what I would say, to find resolvement here.
Bonjour, hello, Chiefs. I have a question in English et ensuite en français. Chief Simon said in his introductory remarks that he would encourage protesters to lift the blockades. I was wondering if the other chiefs, all of you, could maybe state your position. Should the protesters stop the blockades or not?
Chiefs? Is this to who do we want? Oh.
I would say I agree that there's a need at some point in time to for the protesters and the protectors of the land. Let's call them. That's what they are. They protect the land, and they feel this need to get out there to do something to ensure that land is protected. At some point in time, this has to come to a peaceful end. But in the meantime, there are certain guarantees that everybody's looking for that need to be put in place, and all the parties that, as National Chief has pointed out, all the parties need to be able to work together to ensure that happens. It's not incumbent on one group of people. Those people on the front lines need to have the reassurance that their voice is heard, that the actions that they took has meaning, and something positive will come out of that. So when that happens, then you're going to see a backing off and a quiet resolution to this.
I don't know if anyone else wanted to answer the question. Should the blockades be lifted?
Again, I've always said, or I can go. The issue is, again, and Grand Chief Joe talked about, you can't criminalize people for standing up for their rights, title, and jurisdiction. So I've always said political activism. Don't call them blockades. Don't call them protesters. They're people standing up for change and standing up for their rights and title. And this is one of support for the Wet'suwet'en peoples. What's going on across Canada. The Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs asked for help and support. And people have heard that call. And you've heard from the Haudenosaunee leadership here, and you heard from a knowledge keeper, an elder, in terms of their longhouse laws. And it's all about peace. And if you put that peace and those principles of peace and respect and working together, things will come down, because that's the law of peace, mutually benefiting from the land and resource wealth. And Grand Chief Serge talked about compassion, the power of compassion for people across this land. We get that. We see that. And then on the other hand, it's like these issues they're not new. Dealing with land claim. I don't even like using the word land claims. It's land restoration. And there's got to be some new processes that come out of this. And I believe there will be, because I talked about the need for the UN Declaration to be recognized and implemented. I talked about, we didn't even talk about the 94 calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. That helped light about Canadians, about the genocide of the residential schools. We didn't even talk about the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and the 231 calls to justice that have to be implemented with a national action plan. We didn't even talk about the 5 to 7 times the young people are killing themselves. We didn't even talk about that. Too many of our people in jail. So the list will go on and on. So there's an inconvenience on both sides. But so when you ask this question, it's broad awareness. Our relatives, our brothers and sisters can hold their heads high. They've elevated this issue to a national, international level. And we want to make sure that it's peace in a good way. We also want to be concerned with the welfare of people that are on those lines there, that things come in a good way based on our elders' teaching. And if you put the elders' teachings in the ceremony first, we're guided by those 7 teachings, no matter what nation or tribe. And it's truth and honesty, love, respect, courage, wisdom, and humility. Those will guide us forward. When you put those at the forefront, you'll find things can come and work out in a good way and things come down.
Pour vous, Chef Simon.
And for you, Chief Simon, Your position is that we should remove lift the blockade, and you said that there was an impact for you. Is it bullying? What happened to you? I think it's a misunderstanding of what I said over the past few days. I'm not asking that the blockade be lifted up completely, but that something be done, because there is the economic impact. It could be very serious, and it will have an impact on everyone. We ask the people if they had made their point and if the government understood, and as well as the industry, and I believe they did. We don't want the situation to escalate, because the governments will have to do something. We don't know what, but there could be an escalation on our side as well, and everybody will lose. So, as I said, there are different ways to express solidarity. And it's not just the blockade. There are other ways. So our support for the hereditary chiefs will not be diminished. It's just find other ways, because we cannot lose the good faith that we developed over the past 10 years with the Canadian population. It's very important for us to present our issues with respect and in friendship.
The blockade at Tyendinaga was not prompted by the elected council, but there were people in our community that saw an injustice being done to the Wet'suwet'en Nation by their traditional leaders not being heard, and by being overruled by a court injunction and police intervention. And there should have been room for dialogue with those people, particularly when there was strong disagreement in the leadership. In my opinion, the project should have not proceeded in that climate. The government does have a responsibility to have dialogue with those people. Most people are talking about this. We don't even know why the Wet'suwet'en Nation traditional chiefs oppose this pipeline. Do they want it in a different location? Do they not want it at all? Are there things in the impact benefit agreement they disagree with? Nobody's ever bothered to give them the opportunity to hear their voice. And this is where I think the media fail the public. They want to focus the attention on somewhere else than where the real issue is. And so we need to hear from the traditional chiefs what it is they object to, and do they have a proposal to bring to the table that should be considered. And that's where the attention should be. And I don't want to say something that would only inflame people that are protesting, not only in my community but across the country, and Joe's community in Toronto and other provinces, and even the it wasn't too long ago we had a quarrel between two provinces over pipelines. We had a quarrel between the provinces and the federal government. So obviously there's a lot of unanswered questions in the Canadian public as well about pipelines. And maybe there's more information that the media could put out about the pipeline debate than just these blockades and stuff, because it's not about blockades. Fundamentally, what's at issue is the decision-making rights of the traditional leaders and the Wet'suwet'en Nation, and that's what's not been respected, and that's why we now have this conflict that's going on. And the resource development companies have some responsibility to make sure they get it right, but not to resort to court injunctions to force their will and corporate greed on the Indigenous nations. Our people have experienced that. When the resources were transferred to the provinces by the federal government, our people were not involved in that discussion, nor did we ever give our consent to have our traditional land or resources transferred to provinces so they'd have all to say about it. As a matter of fact, it flies in the promises of the Crown that were made in the Royal Proclamation of 1763. There were lands that were reserved for the Indian country and our hunting grounds, and the Crown was supposed to protect that land from trespass and frauds, because the Crown at that point in time acknowledged a lot of land frauds had already taken place. So it was an intervention by the King to stop that, and no land could be settled peacefully unless the Indians ceded and surrendered their title. The Indians, the indigenous nation of Wet'suwet'en, never ceded or surrendered their land. So they have the right to make a decision about development that's going to be on their land. And so that's why this conversation needs to happen with the traditional chiefs there to find out what is it that they want.
Hi, over here. Brett Forster, APTN News, Kettle and Stony Point First Nation. I put this question to all of you. There's been a lot of blowback about this. So you've had op-eds in the media calling for the military to be sent in. You've had Andrew Scheer said that he would personally direct the RCMP to move in. I know APTN's social media feed has been flooded with hateful comments. What's your reaction to this blowback, and what's your message to your peoples who are experiencing a lot of hate because of this?
I would just answer it this way, that again, principles of peaceful coexistence and respect for each other is needed, and it's not a time for divisive comments from any leader. It's a time for calm. It's a time for dialogue. It's a time for coming together of our peoples. And even regarding the injunctions, you know, and I've said this before, that the proper exercise of police discretion should not be confused with lack of enforcement. It's a difficult time for the RCMP and the OPP and the SK and everybody else. So it's because they're not being enforced. They're using their discretion. And that's a positive thing. People got to acknowledge that. And again, always calling for calm and peace. Using ceremonies, you're not going to go wrong. You know, and I would say, like, the goodwill of the Canadian people, because I can only go back to our teachings, and we have a treaty relationship with the Crown, and we're to mutually benefit from sharing. We don't give up anything. We're sharing the land and resource wealth with the newcomers here to these lands. The hatchet was buried, there would be peace. You know, even the teachings of what, like our eagles, why is our eagle staff curved? That's our flag. That's our nation. At one time it was straight. It was a spear to kill. But our people said, we'll curve it. It will still be used to recognize our people, but there will be peace between our peoples. And people need to know that and respect that on all sides. This is a great, beautiful country. We cannot give up on reconciliation. We cannot give up on the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as the path forward. We can't give up on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action. We have work to do. We have to implement 231 calls to justice from the Missing Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Inquiry. We need Canadians to get behind all of that, because then we can really build a country where our children and grandchildren can respect each other in a good way. That's the work we've got to do going forward.
Every November the 11th, Canadians lay wreaths at the cenotaph in honor of all those who served and gave their lives at wartime when the security of this country was an issue. In my community, we had the highest number of Indigenous volunteers. In the First World War, 101. And the Second World War, 213, and ever since we've made the covenant chain in 1664, we've always answered the call to arms on behalf of the King or Queen of England. And so we gave distinguished military service and our lives in that cause of freedom and justice, and that included justice for the Indigenous people. And so when you lay a wreath there, remember that our people also gave their lives for the values that say that Canadians are so important to them.
Yeah.
Let's not forget.
Yeah, partial response. I guess the warmongers out there who are quick to pull the pin and throw the bomb should think about what's happened in the last little while. I mean, the reminder that Don gives us all in terms of the sacrifices our people's made. We do the same thing in Kahnawake too. Every November we have a commemoration to those that died. But to those people who are quick to pull the pin and to come down hard or demand that harsh things be done, you know, It's 30 years ago since what they call the Oka crisis. It's not that long ago with the Camp Ipperwash and the death of Dudley George. People quote that and use that as a reminder to themselves. We should use restraint. We've heard that from politicians, provincial and federal politicians. Nobody wants to see that again. So to those who want to, and that's why I call them the warmongers, they should also think about that too. And it's easy to send in the, whether it's the military or whether it's the Ontario Provincial Police, or whether it's the RCMP, or in Quebec, the Sûreté de Quebec. It's easy to send them in right away, Go ahead and go in and do our bidding, do our work for us while we sit back and we watch. But it's another thing to be on the front lines. And I've been on the front lines.
Just expand on what my brothers were just talking about. Yeah, Mr. Scheer and those right-wing politicians are always going to come out with that kind of solution, a hard line to everything. This is something we discussed earlier. Is it possible that we're going to be fueling that right-wing mentality that still we're seeing across Europe, United States, here in Canada? But I see what the tactic with Mr. Scheer. Bring up the worst possible scenario, and those that are at the blockades, if they lift the blockades under those kind of threats, then it's going to look like as if it was fear. But on the other hand, those that are doing the blockades, and say, yeah, we're not afraid of you. We're going to stay here despite what you're threatening. And that leads to an escalation, which will lead to what Mr. Scheer actually wants. I'm sure that him and his Conservatives would love to send in the Army to prove some kind of parliamentary supremacy over First Nations people. But like I said, just asking and reasoning with those at the blockades, not because they're fearful. These guys are brave for what they did. They've proven it. Don't let Mr. Scheer make you think that if you exercise compassion and take those blockades down, you're not doing this out of fear. You've proven that you're not scared. So don't let them bait you into something that you don't want to do.
When countries and provinces have disagreements with they never use racism as a tool to silence the voice of other people. They call meetings and they have dialogue. And that's what the Prime Minister did in this case. Mm-hmm. And that shows good leadership. And all the parties in the House of Commons should always use the measures when they're dealing with other nations, with our nation, to have dialogue to resolve disputes. And I think we need to be patient and to see what dialogue will bring. I'm sure protesters are having discussions among themselves on what they need to end the blockade. I'm sure they're not just standing there. They're having talks among themselves. We just have to see what the government is prepared to do, and the focus should be on that. What is the government going to do in relation to the traditional chiefs at Wet'suwet'en, and do they have a proposal that warrants consideration, and is it reasonable?
Yeah, just as a follow-up, add something.
There are people that are not sitting here that believe that the earth is our mother, that we have ceremonies to honor and respect all of creation, and they have a spiritual philosophy that we're all related. It is very important for a time for them to send a delegation to come and sit. That's the peaceful solution. They're being set aside throughout history. While Canada brought out the Indian Act and say, these are your leaders. Well, the leaders of our nations are people that have respect for the land. They have respect for all of creation. And they need to be here. Mm-hmm. That's the fight. We have to see beyond what the National Chief said. See beyond the Indian Act. See the beauty of our culture. and put that on the table, because that's really what's important now for people to learn from one another. And we haven't done that yet. It's a struggle. It will continue to be a struggle for a while. But if everybody's committed to peace, we can take a short time off, set up an agenda, and say, let's do that work, and come back and see where we are. I think that that's one of the things I see as an opportunity. But there's people that need to be here that are not here presently, and I just can't help but notice. It's the traditional side. We can't go along with Canada and say they're not important. These are the ones that we've recognized as leaders. Well, these are our nations, our traditional leaders, elders. They are our leaders as well. We need to regroup amongst ourselves and give that recognition back to them. So that's the important part.
Just as a follow-up to the national chief, I was at the demonstration here in Ottawa, and it was led mainly by Indigenous youth. And they have one demand, which is pretty clear. They are protesting the RCMP. They want the RCMP off Wet'suwet'en territory. What's your message to the young people that are leading these demonstrations, and do you support their call to have the RCMP off the Wet'suwet'en land?
It's good to see our young people, and we've always said to harness the energy of our youth. You know, they're the young ones coming up. And we have to try to build a better future for the young people and provide them with hope that they won't have to deal with all these outdated policies that we're still fighting. You know, because we call them termination policies of comprehensive claims and specific claims, additions to reserve the inherent right. They're based on termination of rights, title, and jurisdiction, not recognition. So we need to fix that, and we need to formalize process with the Crown. And so, again, we've the police forces are sworn to uphold, and I've said this before, 2 laws in Canada, common law and then civil law in Quebec. And these police forces are sworn to uphold those laws. And until we get to a space where our laws can be recognized in addition to common law and civil law, Wet'suwet'en law, Haudenosaunee law, Nehiyawak law, Cree law, Anishinaabeg law, there will be this conflict. And so we need to expand, and if we really want to start talking about reconciliation and restorative justice, that's where we need to go. And then there are options when our young people say the RCMP to be out. And I talked about, well, there are tribal police. There are peacekeepers. We have our societies. We have our way of maintaining peace. And those things should be looked at. And so that would be my message to the young people, is to hold them up and thank them for their energy. Thank them for their standing up. And but to channel that in a positive way so that we can have positive change into systems that I've said before, that these are courts of law, not courts of justice. And we have to keep moving towards restorative justice, but recognition of our laws as well, in addition to common law, civil law. And that's the work going forward. That's how I would say that.
Yeah. Radio-Canada, puis ensuite ça va être Toronto Star.
Chief Bellegarde, I would like to hear you about what should have been done by this government, the federal government, in the last few months, years, to maybe prevent the situation where we're at now, and on a short-term basis, what should be done? Should there be concretely a working table set up to address land reclamation? I'd like to hear more about what should be done in a short-term basis.
I would say there's been so much good work done over the last number of years. I think back to all these reports and commissions. I think back to the Hawthorne report, the Penner report, the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples report, that as a result of the Oka crisis, there was a whole commission. And I think of the 94 calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And I think of now, just currently, the 231 calls to justice from the Missing Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. All these are good reports. Look at them. Implement the recommendations now. That would be my advice to governments, both federal and provincial. Look at all this good work that's been done and implement the recommendations. You don't need another study. Implement the recommendations going forward. That would be my advice there. On the short term, processes to respect nationhood and Aboriginal rights and title holders, to move beyond the Indian Act, no question. You know, and that's where I talked about those 4 policy tables that need to be fixed and updated. We've won numerous Supreme Court decisions as Indigenous peoples on treaty rights, on inherent rights, Aboriginal rights and title. That's through the judicial branch. We need the legislative and the executive branches of government to keep up with what the judicial branch is saying. And that means comprehensive policy and legislative changes. That's what's got to happen. And that's got to be done collaboratively, if you will, or in partnership with Indigenous peoples. That's what's got to go on.
Chef Simon, j'aimerais vous entendre sur le message que vous avez.
I'd like to hear you on the message that you shared earlier. If the blockade was to go on, what's the risk regarding the public opinion and also regarding the reconciliation goodwill? Could this compromise the good work done? Yes, that was exactly my point. My point this morning and over the past few days. There will be an erosion of the good faith that we developed over the past few years. The issues of the First Nations are being slowly understood by the community. So we need concrete action, such as the implementation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. This was a huge step for everyone, for Canadian society as well as for us. So this is where we are trying to find a balance between the right to protest and the right to protect ourselves, and remembering that there are bigger issues than just moments here and there. Each moment, of course, is important. I'm explaining to the Minister of Indigenous Relations in Quebec what's happening in my territory. Some people didn't like what I said, and they put chains around the doors of the big house. But the peace message can be received in a different way by people who have a different agenda. And then it will be Le Devoir.
Maybe there's a question for Chief Bellegarde and Chief Miracle. What is your understanding of, as precisely as you can get, of what the demands or what it would take to lift the blockades in Eastern Canada? What are the demands we're hearing from the people on the ground, or that you're hearing that they would need in order to move back and lift those blockades?
Do you want to comment first, Chief?
I think the National Chief has already answered that question, but he can answer it again.
Just more, again, in discussions, you need to say, like, the Wet'suwet'en peoples made a call and request for assistance and help because their hereditary chieftainships weren't being recognized. And one of them was to have the RCMP vacate their ancestral lands. That was the request, and I think people were triggered by the use of force, and so in discussions and dialogue for information we've been able to get together, if the RCMP were to be removed from their ancestral territories and lands, and then the blockades would come down. And that's my understanding of it. And it may not be that simplistic, but the RCMP withdrew their forces from 130 plus down to 21, and so they within the 22,000 square kilometers up there are 4 RCMP stations, and so they're also an element of Wet'suwet'en people that want them there too, but in terms, so there's options, but again, has to come from the Wet'suwet'en peoples themselves, and there could be options like peacekeepers, like their own tribal police, but that can come from themselves. And again, lifting up, like there's the use of discretion, and just because you have a court injunction doesn't mean you automatically enforce it and use the force. Like they're exercising pretty good judgment, and so that should be upheld and that should be acknowledged. And so going forward, like that's one of the requests, as I understand it, and there could be options. But again, the Wet'suwet'en peoples have to resolve this internally as a nation, as peoples, as hereditary chiefs, as Indian chiefs, because you've heard in the media as well, there's a lot of people that support Coastal GasLink because they have access to jobs, training opportunities, economic development, and they're tired of administering their own poverty. So they're looking at all options, even equity ownership if you're going to go down that road. But again, it's up to the rights and title holders to make that decision determination when it comes to what projects get built. It's also up to the rights and title holders, are their nation, state, and how they want to be looked after in terms of the police force that comes in, which one. And there's some options that they can develop their own. That's really an act of self-determination.
In calling for that process to figure out to resolve this dispute in the Wet'suwet'en Nation and to interact with how they would want to interact with the Crown on decisions like this, is it your view that the company should suspend construction of the pipeline basically, until that process is worked out, until there's a process to interact with the Crown and make these decisions within that nation itself?
I would say Coastal GasLink has an obligation. And I've said this before companies try to build anything, build a respectful relationship with Indigenous peoples, with the rights and title holders. You'll get it right if you do that from start to finish on any major project, and that'll apply to any major development in Canada. So before you build anything, build a respectful relationship. And so there's an obligation of industry in the private sector to get it right. And some will say they might have thought they got it right with all the IBAs they've signed. But there's a very important piece. The hereditary chiefs, to my understanding, were put to the side. And that's not acceptable. And so that's what we're trying to rectify now. And I think there's an obligation from industry to get back to the table, to listen in a very respectful way.
And also, oops, sir. Okay, well, to expand on GasLink, you can't say that they didn't know that they were going to encounter some problems. The Unistoten camp has been up in that area for several years now, and the position of the hereditary chiefs were also well known in that area. So I guess what it looks like is that GasLink went to the side, the path of least resistance, going with those that were going to say yes. Instead of accommodating, we've said it before, the industry has no problem throwing $1 billion here and $1 billion there whenever it suits their purpose. But when it seems to me that when it's to accommodate a First Nation in any particular issue, it costs too much. Like the alternate route that the hereditary chiefs had agreed to would have cost, what, $800 million more? It would have probably put the project back 1 year. But when you're talking about billions and billions of dollars in revenue, isn't it worth kind of taking that extra effort and that extra time to avoid these kind of situations? I think it would have, but they didn't.
Yes, hi, Chief Miracle. I wanted to ask, Grand Chief Simon mentioned that the blockades, or suggested that the blockades perhaps could be lifted, even if it's temporarily, to show good faith. We didn't hear you on that. Do you agree that that would be? Do you agree? And should we expect to see the blockades come down in your community in the short term?
Well, first of all, I don't speak for the protesters because the protest was not organized by the Mohawk Council. They speak for themselves. They have internal dialogue and a process, and I have to respect that. There's information that I might have that's confidential that I'm not allowed to, that I'm not entitled to share with others because it's addressed to the people who are hosting the blockade. And so I want to show respect for their rights as well. And I want to contribute to things that are going to create good dialogue and not prolong tension. And so the dialogue with the traditional chiefs seems to be a very important piece to a resolution. The Supreme Court have already ruled that they have rights to have a say, be part of the decision making in this. And I think, and I've already said, it was fundamentally wrong to go ahead with the resource development when there was strong leadership, strong division within the leadership. And so we find ourselves in this situation not because of protesters, but because the way the whole thing was handled in the first place.
But do you agree that it would be a show of good faith to maybe take a step back?
It's going to really, whether I think the determination will depend on what comes out of these talks that the Prime Minister is asked to have occur. And so I'm supporting, let those talks proceed and let's see where we're at when those talks. But I don't want to say things that are inflammatory that would not contribute to a resolution.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
Those talks you refer to, those are the talks between Minister Bennett, Fraser, and the hereditary chiefs. Is that what you're referring to?
The hereditary chiefs are the ones who are opposed to this development. They need to be heard.
National Chief, just a quick question. The government introduced legislation to change the oath of citizenship Act today to reflect the Reconciliation Commission. Your reaction to that, and are you skeptical of the timing, please?
No, Again, I don't have the oath of citizenship in front of me, and I don't know what's actually being proposed. But I know through some preliminary dialogues, we're trying to make some changes to the oath of citizenship when newcomers come to Canada, and then, they swear allegiance and to the Crown. And we did have some input at one point to as well, when our new relatives come to this great country called Canada, that they should have a knowledge and awareness about the First Nations people here, about our right to self-determination, know all about the treaty relationships that we have with the Crown, whether it be the Victorian treaties, the numbered treaties, whether it be the Turo Wampum Treaty, whether it be the covenant chain. Like, we have a treaty relationship with the Crown, and so the newcomers should know about that relationship. Our relatives that are coming, and they're coming to Canada for a better life, better future, and we all need to benefit from sharing the land and resource wealth. So that treaty relationship is very important. And so if you're coming in and taking this oath of citizenship, you should be aware of what Indigenous peoples have shared with all the 37 million people in Canada. All the land and resource wealth that we're sharing, all the lands. And at one time, like our 634, we call them reservations, they're on 0.02% of the land base in Canada, and 99.8's been taken up for settlement by provinces and territories. And so when people say, what have First Nations contributed? I say, just look at all the land and look at it in the sense of how much has been generated from those lands and territories and resources, all the GDP, and so anybody coming to Canada should be aware of that. So we recommended some changes to the oath of citizenship, when you become Canadians. And that's just part of that education, the awareness piece, that as First Nations people, we're sharing a lot. And it was all done about peaceful coexistence, mutual respect, mutually benefiting from all the land and resource wealth. And we're not supposed to be 6th and 63rd in terms of quality of life, in terms of socioeconomic conditions. Canada's up high, we're still down here. And so that's not mutually benefiting from the land resource. So we have a lot of work to do. So I think the newcomers coming in should be aware of that, some of the struggles, but that treaty relationship with the Crown is fundamental. So we wanted that referenced in the oath of citizenship, so that becomes part of the new piece. It's important.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
Okay.